Welcome to Modern Crime Scope, your destination for gripping true crime stories and real-life mysteries. We dive deep into shocking cases, uncover hidden details, and take you inside the moments that changed everything. Subscribe for suspense, investigation, and stories you won't forget. Mark Daniels thought he had planned the perfect crime, but in the blink of an eye, every step he took led him straight into a trap he never saw coming. On a quiet, rainy evening in a small town, the streets shimmered with the reflections of dim streetlights. Most houses were silent, with families tucked safely inside, unaware that trouble was brewing nearby. At the end of Maple Lane, a modest brick house stood slightly apart from the others. Its windows were dark, except for a faint light flickering in the living room, where a man moved with precise, almost mechanical care. The storm outside cast shadows that danced across the walls, but inside, the room was silent, except for the soft, deliberate sounds of cleaning and organizing. He was aware of every detail, the smallest fingerprint, the tiniest smear of dirt. But he ignored the trembling in his hands. Tonight was supposed to be perfect. Every surface had been wiped, every trace of his actions hidden. A broken vase lay carefully tucked behind a sofa, evidence of a struggle neatly concealed. The carpet had been vacuumed twice, even in corners most people never noticed. A stack of papers was arranged as though untouched, a subtle lie meant to fool anyone who might glance in. He had disabled the security cameras he knew would watch the house, confident that no one could see what had happened. He had rehearsed his movements countless times, imagining each scenario, believing he had accounted for every possibility. Despite the precision, there were signs he had underestimated the situation. A small red light blinked faintly on a device in the corner of the room, unnoticed by him. It was barely visible, almost hidden by shadows, but it quietly recorded everything. Outside, the rain continued to fall, pattering against the roof and windows, masking the faint click of the neighbor's camera shutter. This unnoticed watcher, a seemingly ordinary security camera in a window across the street, had captured the night's events in a way the man could never have imagined. He moved through the house like a ghost, double-checking drawers and cupboards, lifting objects to make sure nothing had been overlooked. His mind ran through each step again and again, a constant loop of planning and reassurance. In his head, everything was under control. He believed he had thought of every angle, every mistake, every possibility of detection. Each careful motion reinforced his sense of superiority, his belief that he was smarter than anyone else in this quiet town. But even in his confidence, tiny inconsistencies began to appear. A faint scuff on the wooden floor, a small fleck of dust that refused to disappear. These minor imperfections gnawed at him, though he brushed them aside. He ignored the subtle noises of the storm outside, focusing entirely on his carefully constructed reality. In his mind, he was untouchable. No one could connect the dots. No one could trace the evidence back to him. The world outside might seem ordinary and safe, but inside that house, a tension lingered, a tension he didn't fully recognize, a danger waiting just beyond the walls. By the time he finished, the room looked flawless, a perfect image of domestic calm. Yet the unseen camera across the street held the truth. Every motion, every meticulous effort to hide the crime had been recorded in silence. He walked out of the room, satisfied with his work, unaware that the first step of his downfall had already begun. One small, invisible witness had seen everything, and the night that seemed so under his control had planted the seeds of inevitable discovery. The morning after the storm, the quiet town felt oddly tense, though no one could say why. Neighbors stepped outside to shake off the rain, their conversations low and casual, unaware that the events of the previous night were about to unravel. At the crime scene, flashing lights from police cars painted the house in harsh red and blue, slicing through the gray morning. Investigators moved with precision, taking notes, photographing surfaces, and dusting for fingerprints. Each step was methodical, each action deliberate. as if they were piecing together a puzzle invisible to the untrained eye. The suspect, however, remained oblivious. He went about his day as usual, blending into the quiet rhythm of the town, confident that nothing could trace back to him. He checked his phone obsessively, reading news updates and scrolling through social media, but nothing seemed to point toward his involvement. The reports were vague, describing the incident in general terms and offering only blurred photos of people who could not be identified. Each passing hour reinforced his belief in his own invisibility, that he had executed his plan flawlessly. But investigators had already begun to notice small anomalies. A single discarded piece of paper found near the edge of the scene carried a fragment of handwriting. A smudge on a shoe print hinted at movement that didn't match the supposed timeline. Tiny details, almost laughably minor on their own, began to form a pattern when viewed together. The detectives were meticulous, trained to see what others overlooked. They didn't rush. They observed, collected, and slowly let the evidence build like bricks forming a wall around the suspect. Then, while reviewing traffic camera footage from the area, a detective spotted a vehicle appearing repeatedly near the house during the hours of the crime. It wasn't unusual for cars to pass through, but the pattern was too consistent, too deliberate. The camera captured glimpses of the license plate, the make of the car, and even the timing of each stop. That vehicle became a critical piece of the puzzle, a quiet thread that connected movements the suspect believed were invisible. Every detail he had ignored, every choice he had assumed was safe, was now being scrutinized frame by frame, pixel by pixel. Meanwhile, the suspect went about his routine, unaware of the digital trail forming behind him. Each phone call, each online search, and each small trip out of the house left a footprint. Authorities began cross-referencing his patterns with the evidence collected at the scene, slowly tightening the net. For now, he remained just another face in the crowd, but the walls were closing in. A single overlooked fact could tip the balance, and in the mind of the investigator, it often did. By evening, the suspect felt a faint, nagging tension he couldn't explain. Something in the air seemed off, though he tried to dismiss it. He couldn't see it yet. But the careful, deliberate work of the detectives had begun to map his world in ways he would never anticipate. Every decision he had made to stay invisible, every meticulous action from the previous night, was now part of a growing trail that authorities were quietly following. The illusion of control was starting to crack, and with each passing hour, the consequences of his mistakes edged closer. As the days passed, the suspect began to feel a subtle, creeping unease. At first, he dismissed it as nothing more than nerves, an overreaction to his own thoughts. But the feeling refused to fade. Each glance at the news seemed to sharpen the sensation, each report of investigators piecing together minor clues making his stomach twist. He found himself scanning the streets whenever he went outside, noting every car, every passerby, every unusual movement. His confidence, once so solid, now wavered like a candle flickering in the wind. The police continued their work methodically, collecting data and following threads that seemed insignificant on their own. A transaction made days before, a small purchase from a store, an odd pattern in travel records. These were minor details, almost invisible, yet they added up. The suspect did not know that each tiny oversight was slowly forming a map that pointed directly to him. Investigators had begun connecting disparate pieces of evidence, forming a silent network that was closing in without him even realizing it. He began checking the perimeter of his own life obsessively. Cameras, hidden devices, street traffic. Everything became a potential threat. His mind replayed every step from the night of the crime, scrutinizing each movement for flaws. The tiniest mistakes, once easily dismissed, now felt like glaring errors that could undo all his planning. His previously flawless routine now seemed riddled with vulnerabilities. Every detail he had considered irrelevant now appeared critical. Every familiar route, every casual choice felt exposed. Even in his own home he noticed anomalies. a neighbor's curtain slightly open when it had been closed, the hum of a device that wasn't part of his equipment. He tried to convince himself it was coincidence, but his mind refused to settle. Sleep became shallow, fragmented by dreams of pursuit and capture. He would wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, imagining the slow approach of detectives closing in with irrefutable evidence. Each morning brought a renewed sense of dread, as if the world had shifted just enough to put him at risk without him seeing it. Then came the small, almost imperceptible signs that made the threat feel real. Street cameras had recorded vehicles and pedestrians that the authorities later confirmed as connected to their investigation. People he had noticed days earlier now reappeared in his peripheral vision at odd times, making him question whether he had been seen before. A single overlooked detail, a misfiled receipt, a shadow caught in surveillance, threatened to unravel the entire web he had so carefully woven. The tension grew, silent but suffocating, until it became impossible to ignore. By the end of the week, the suspect's paranoia had evolved into a gnawing certainty that he was being watched. His carefully crafted confidence had crumbled, replaced by a constant fear that every step could be the one to reveal him. The invisible walls closing in were now unmistakable. He realized, in a slow, terrifying dawning, that the authorities were not just investigating, they were hunting. And though he could not yet see them, the noose was tightening, and the perfect illusion of control he had clung to was slipping through his fingers. The day began like any other, but a subtle shift in the air made the suspect uneasy. Every movement felt heavier, every shadow longer, and every glance from strangers seemed loaded with meaning. The tension he had felt for days now pulsed through him constantly, like a drumbeat he could neither escape nor ignore. The world outside seemed ordinary, but inside, his mind raced relentlessly. He walked down familiar streets, yet everything felt different, as though the town itself had turned against him. He noticed patterns he had previously ignored. A car parked at the corner of his street for hours, a person lingering near the entrance of a store, the same faces appearing repeatedly in different places. His stomach twisted each time he realized that someone might be tracking him. For weeks, he had assumed he was invisible, untouchable, but the pieces of the investigation he hadn't seen were closing in. His confidence, once solid, now felt like a fragile mask barely holding together. Even mundane tasks became exercises in anxiety. Picking up groceries felt like a trap. A simple trip to the pharmacy made him scan every corner, every reflection, every passerby. The world seemed suddenly hyper-aware, as if all eyes were on him, noting his every action. He tried to rationalize, telling himself it was coincidence, paranoia, overthinking. But deep down, he knew the truth. The noose was tightening, and his carefully orchestrated freedom was slipping away. The realization struck hardest when he noticed a familiar face in a public place. It wasn't someone he knew, but the way they watched him, the calm, deliberate observation, made him freeze. This person didn't approach, didn't signal, but the presence alone was enough. His mind raced back through every choice he had made, the smallest missteps, the overlooked evidence, the tiny mistakes that now seemed monumental. He felt exposed in a way he had never felt before, as though every decision from the past weeks was laid bare for the world to see. The weight of inevitability settled in. Every escape route he had considered now seemed impossible, every contingency plan flawed. His previous actions, the meticulous steps he had taken to cover his tracks, were unraveling in ways he could not control. He realized that law enforcement had not been passive. They had been quietly connecting dots he hadn't noticed, following traces that seemed insignificant, and turning them into an unbreakable chain. Every step he had taken toward freedom now led him closer to capture. Panic and clarity collided in his mind. The storm of fear became a sharp, undeniable certainty. The house he had once considered a fortress of security now felt like a cage. The streets outside no longer a route to anonymity, but a gauntlet lined with unseen observers. His carefully constructed sense of safety was gone. The moment had arrived. The invisible hand of consequence had touched him. He understood in a piercing instant that he was not merely at risk, he was trapped. Every calculation, every meticulous effort had been insufficient. The world had shifted, and he had nowhere left to hide. By the time night fell, the suspect could no longer ignore the reality pressing in from every direction. His house, once a haven of careful planning, now felt suffocating. Shadows seemed to shift unnaturally, and every sound, footsteps in the distance, a car engine idling briefly, the click of a door, set his nerves on edge. He could no longer trust the world outside or the streets he had walked countless times. The illusion of control he had clung to was shattered, replaced by a chilling clarity. He had been caught, and he had known it, even if only subconsciously, for hours, maybe days. Authorities had traced every movement, every transaction, every digital footprint with meticulous precision. They had followed the small, seemingly meaningless pieces of evidence he had ignored, assembling them into a comprehensive portrait of guilt. Every tiny error, every moment of carelessness that he had convinced himself was irrelevant, now loomed like a mountain too high to climb. He had thought he was invisible, untouchable, a step ahead of the law. Now, the truth pressed down with brutal weight. He had been wrong. The moment of reckoning arrived quietly, almost without warning. While walking down a familiar street, he felt a sudden presence, something in the air that made him stop. Across the street, a figure observed him with careful, deliberate patience. He recognized the posture, the subtle signals, even though he could not yet name them. Panic surged, sharp and immediate, as he realized he had no escape. The world around him seemed to slow. Every movement he had planned, every contingency, every carefully calculated step evaporated instantly under the unyielding scrutiny of law enforcement. As officers closed in, the weight of inevitability hit him fully. He replayed the crime in his mind, noting every misstep, every oversight, every detail he had dismissed in his arrogance. The careful cleaning, the erased fingerprints, the disabled cameras, all undone by the one thing he had overlooked. The world was larger than his control, and investigators had seen what he had not. His thoughts raced, trying to grasp a last-minute solution, some way to reverse the tide, but there was none. Every path forward had been anticipated, every corner sealed, every exit blocked. When the officers finally reached him, handcuffs waiting, the realization struck with absolute clarity. He understood that his freedom had been an illusion from the start, that the meticulous life he had built around secrecy and precision had been dismantled by forces he could not contain. The exact moment he truly understood it, the moment he knew without question that he was irreversibly trapped, was the moment the cuffs clicked around his wrists. The world had shifted irrevocably, leaving him exposed, powerless, and entirely at the mercy of the law. Led away through flashing lights and curious onlookers, the suspect felt the weight of every misstep he had ever made. The life he had carefully orchestrated, every plan designed to outwit justice, had collapsed entirely. There was no turning back, no secret left to protect him, no final maneuver to regain control. The finality was crushing and undeniable. He had been caught, and the consequences were inescapable. Every thought, every move, every choice had led to this precise, irreversible moment. And in that instant, the truth settled fully in his mind. He was utterly, completely, and hopelessly screwed.